Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 25th of May already, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, which you can always find on weather.gov/Alaska. Another way to get interesting tidbits throughout the day is to find us on Facebook, and recently we've talked about the upcoming nice weather it looks like for parts of southeast and south central Alaska, and surely the interior will have your fair share as well, though parts of winter are still hanging on. Interesting thing to note, though, if you're in AKwx yesterday, you probably had a handful of hail that you were looking at and enjoying. Those ice balls there form when we have very large thunderstorms that are capable of producing a lot of upward moving air, and a lot of that freezes the raindrops, and as they fall out, sometimes of course they can fall out as hailstones, and we saw some of those pictures online. Anytime you have information like that, first of all, that helps us do a better job and help protect more communities around Alaska. When you let us know, just give us a call or tag us on Twitter. AKwx is a great way to share your Alaska weather pictures. Put it on Facebook as well, or just pick up the phone and give us a call at the National Weather Service office in Fairbanks. That would be the office that serves AKwx and the North Coast. And of course, you can call the Weather Info line and get the forecast anytime, 800-472-0391, and find us on YouTube, NWS Alaska, and looking for AKwx TV. After this show, you can get the complete broadcast if perhaps you're out doing some fishing or hunting into the evening hours and you missed the show when it's live on air in your community. Here's a look at the hazardous weather, and we are still watching flood potential there across the Colville River Delta. The Sag and the Kuparik River are still releasing ice, and the ice jam up on the Sag continues to hold, so it's not completely open yet. However, if it releases, there could be a potential for some higher water moving down and into the delta. If that's the case, then perhaps there's a flood. And until that point, until we get past that point, either way, a flood watch remains in effect across the North Slope there for the Colville River Delta. Here's a look at the breakup map. We're still talking about breakup for the North Slope. Everywhere else is in the deep blue, and that means open water right now. However, that yellow dot is the Colville River Delta there under a flood watch, and you can see the different shades of blue indicating mostly open to some open across the North Slope. As we see those ice jams release, then the water should kind of pick up a little bit more for a little while and then gradually subside as it flows out to sea. You can always check the latest breakup map anytime you want by going to weather.gov/APRFC. That's Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center is what APRFC stands for. So anytime you like to check that out and get the latest conditions, you certainly can. Of course, as we're into summertime now, we're talking about fire danger, and we're looking at kind of the usual suspect spots right now. Those are around the Anchorage Bowl of the northern Kenai Peninsula, across the Copper River Basin, the upper Tanana Valley into the middle Tanana Valley, and also the middle to upper Yukon Valley, generally north and west of Fort Yukon there. A couple dry spots. It is surely not very widespread at this point, but let's not forget, northern parts of southeast around Haines had a little bit more of a drier fire index today, so be careful there. As always, though, especially going into holiday weekends where more and more people like to get out and about in some of the more populated areas, but no matter where you are in Alaska, it is always important to be fire-wise and careful with fire. Do your duty there and just make sure you stir the ashes a little extra before you leave camp there. Make sure everything's out. Douse it once, douse it twice, douse it 3 times, and then give it a good stir. And that's always a good way to make sure that things are tamped down before you leave your fire site. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture now, and for those of you that have been watching for the last 5 years, you know this is my time of the year. I love to look at the visible satellite picture because it shows so much detail. Look at the swirl out here across the west. This is the next weather maker that's going to try anyway. It's not doing such a hot job. This boundary right here is colder air trying to be pushed eastward into the central and eastern Aleutians. High pressure's in charge of the Gulf right now. That's what's squashing all the clouds across the north and eastern Gulf of Alaska. We have a lot of stable clouds here, the very flat stratus and fog layers at times across the north and western Gulf. And we have high pressure also trying to work its way northward, pushing warmer air up through the Bering Strait. And the bubbly kind of rough texture you see here is a weak circulation of low pressure working across the north and eastern Brooks Range, allowing clouds to bubble up like we saw yesterday around AKwx and Fairbanks, with hail being reported and showers and thunderstorms as well. So let's watch this one more time. Considering all of that, take a look at what happens here. You can detect that spin just a little bit here across the eastern parts of the Brooks. You can see the very flat and easy movement across the north and western Gulf, and you can see the circulation out in the west. Southeast still dealing with some clouds. Things are starting to filter out there as we're moving toward a nicer and drier weekend for you. Here's a look at the infrared picture. A little bit different, but the same story is told. As you can see, that warmer, wetter air moving northward. It's not moving eastward very quickly with that colder air. In fact, it's running into the ridge of high pressure, so it's stopping right here and kind of stretching out, and it's not going to make a whole lot more of an eastward progression at all. So as we go ahead in time, you'll notice those clouds filtering over into south and western parts of Alaska. For the middle Tanana Valley and northward, more and more of those clouds are working into the eastern and the upper Yukon Valley and around the Alcan border, and across the eastern Gulf, more and more stable air is approaching in that direction too. The weather map shows that colder air. Again, we're talking about that as that's moving eastward. It's really not going to make a whole lot more progression into the western Gulf or the Alaska Peninsula at all. High pressure sitting just south of Kodiak Island at 1,029 millibars. Here's a weak zone of low pressure across Prince William Sound, stretching all the way into the central and eastern Yukon. Showers and thunderstorms are popping up across the upper Yukon Valley this afternoon. We saw some light rain around Kotzebue Sound on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. A little bit of fog across the Beaufort Seacoast, and otherwise dry conditions for most of the state. For tonight, that frontal boundary out in the west is going to fall apart. That's what we indicate there when we start breaking that line into pieces there. It's either falling apart or turning into a front, and in this case, it's losing its muster. A 992 millibar low out across the western Aleutians there. The frontal boundary up north still progressing toward the Bering Strait. As it lifts northward, there's still an opportunity for some rain and freezing rain there just off the Chukchi coast. Otherwise, rain showers for most of the interior there, on and off, especially in the lower and middle Yukon Valley, with high pressure moving out around Bristol Bay. For southeast, some lingering showers across the southern panhandle. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice more areas in south central and southwest looking at sunshine, and temperatures are going to be warm. Upper 60s for many, perhaps a few areas looking at 70-degree temperatures as we move toward the weekend. A lingering shower again across the southern parts of the southern panhandle, so way south for you, Ketchikan, Annette, Metlakatla, maybe. After that, things dry up. There's still a possibility for some thunderstorms across the upper Yukon Valley toward the southeastern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, and showers probably out across the western Brooks Range as well. A chance for some mixed precipitation just offshore, but again, things are pretty warm there, so that's going to be harder and harder to come by. High pressure moves over Norton Sound at 1,026 millibars, and low pressure still holding on to its circulation but losing a lot of its temperature changes around that, so we're losing the fronts which indicate that temperature change. You can still see that out across the western Bering. As we get into Friday, that's still moving northward toward eastern Russia. Showers and thunderstorms may develop across a frontal boundary. The coldest air is dropping south and east along the Rockies, but out across the west, more stable, hotter air is developing across the central and western parts of the state. So any convection, showers, thunderstorms, bubbling clouds, what have you, will be out around that frontal boundary. Everything out across the west is just going to be warm. Look for clouds across south central and southeast, but by and large, things look pretty dry for more and more places as we get into Friday afternoon. Here's a look at the temperatures now. As we look at southeast, we saw many areas there in the upper 40s and easily lower to mid 50s, all the way from places like Ketchikan at 57, Hyder 56, Hyder was 57, Juneau around 52 degrees. Sitka saw 53. Yakutat was in the mid-50s as well. Prince William Sound, I saw Cordova up to 57 today. Look at Valdez, 64 degrees. What a beautiful day there in northern parts of Prince William Sound. 68 in Seward. That's almost a little bit on the hot side for you all. 56 in Kenai, 63 in Anchorage. Lower 60s for Talkeetna, 62 in Glen Allen. Eagle was in the mid-50s there. The middle Tanana Valley around Fairbanks and North Pole also saw temperatures in the mid-50s. Fort Yukon, 54 degrees, and lower 40s for looks like Arctic Village. Anaktuvuk Pass also in the lower 40s. The coastal plain saw temps in the upper 30s to lower 40s as well this afternoon. Barrow was 35, about the same there in Kaktovik. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse not too far behind. Wainwright had 40, 43 around Kotzebue, 39 in Shishmaref with Nome reporting 37. Deering was in the upper 30s, 47 in Galena. Tanana had 52. Grayling saw temps in the mid-40s there with McGrath at 47 degrees, about the same in Bethel and Newtok and many of the surrounding villages. 37 around Gamble, and as you get out toward the Pribilofs, it was a good 10 degrees warmer there for St. Paul and St. George at times today. 40s to low to mid 50s there for the Alaska Peninsula. It looked like Sandpoint was holding at 57, about the same for Kodiak. Mid 40s for Adak and Atka, and low 40s for Shemya. Now overnight low temperatures for South Central will hold in the mid 40s, 47 in Kodiak, low to mid 40s for Southeast. The Middle Tanana Valley and most of the central interior in the mid 40s there, with the North Coast looking at upper 30s and upper 20s and low 30s. The West Coast generally upper 30s to about 40 degrees, Nome near 37, and the Aleutians looking at low 40s there. High temperatures tomorrow back in the mid 60s for South Central, even warmer than today, and upper 50s and low 60s for most of Southeast. The North Coast in the upper 30s to about 40 degrees or so for many. Kotzebue Sound around 40 degrees, maybe warmer inland. Norton Sound temperatures including Unalakleet around 48, 44 in Nome, and Southwest blazing hot, mid to upper 60s at least, some places probably pushing 70 once again. Flying weather now shows IFR conditions across the west coast and a large part of the Yukon Delta, the central chain, and then across the eastern Gulf, but not so much across southeast itself and across the north slope for a limited amount of time. By the afternoon, a lot of improvements there, including in southeast and across the north slope going toward MVFR. The showers and thunderstorms may develop in the east, so we'll watch for that and watch for IFR to mainly hug the coast in the north, west of Nunivak Island, around St. Lawrence Island, and through the Bering Strait, and at times south of the eastern chain. Here's a look at the pass conditions then. Anaktuvik Pass, we expect to see some pretty quick improvements during the daytime. Same goes for Adigan Pass. We'll start at MVFR there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may start at IFR conditions in the morning. We'll see improvements there, and for Rainy Pass during the daytime. Windy Pass, we expect to see marginal flight conditions. Isabel Pass will probably hold on to MVFR, maybe seeing some improvements in the afternoon. The bubbling clouds may change that just a bit. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR developed in the afternoon. Tanita Pass looks pretty good through most of the day, and Portage Pass also we're expecting to see visual flight rule through most of your Thursday. Chilcoot and White Pass right now look really good through the next several days. Here's your freezing levels, and you'll notice that surface freezing line's way up to the north, and look at this huge amount of warm air, levels as high as 8 to 10,000 feet across southwestern Alaska, the Alaska Peninsula, and off the coast of southwest Alaska and Bristol Bay. Some of those levels again will remain very warm throughout the rest of the weekend. The icing potential is pretty high up there, above 7,000 feet. Light to isolated moderate possible there. Mostly it's going to be light, and you can see another patch of moisture there west of the Gulf of Anadyr. So not a whole lot to write home about, but there's a little potential there along the middle Yukon Valley and westward toward the Bering Strait. The jet stream is responsible for this warm-up and that constant flow of warm and wet air moving northward and then riding down the ridge across parts of eastern Alaska. With the ridge sitting across southwest Alaska, we've got wind speeds over the Bering at 100 knots. The main storm track, though, remains well to our south, and you can see that wrapping into low pressure south of the Gulf of Alaska, with weak low pressure exiting southeastern Alaska, moving toward parts of western Canada. At 9,000 feet, the ridge is firmly in control here across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, with south and easterly winds over the Alaska Peninsula. Wind speeds there around 50 knots. Slower winds coming in from the north and west through the interior, about 15 to 20, with northwesterlies moving through southeastern Alaska at 20 to 35, and onshore around the Beaufort Seacoast 15 to 20. At 3,000 feet, winds are very similar across the northern slope, with very westerly conditions of pretty light. They're about 5 to 15 across the Brooks Range. High pressure is pretty much where it was on our last chart, right over southwest, and wind speeds are a little slower coming in from the southeast across the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, with a little bit of a stronger flow from the west for places like Shemya and Attu at 35 knots on the south side of that low pressure system. For southeast, northwesterlies gently gliding over the eastern Gulf at around 10 knots. Quick check of turbulence doesn't have a whole lot to show or write home about, but for the central and eastern chain, generally below 4,000 feet, you may run into a little bit of chop. Some of that could reach isolated moderate at worst. That's all along that frontal boundary as it's slowly drifting eastward across the western Bering. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather and the sea ice edge here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Any sound in a normally quiet area will seem louder than it would in a noisy environment. Now, given what we know about how noise is generated by airplanes and how it's perceived by people on the ground, we can make one simple observation. If we're flying an airplane with a constant speed prop, reducing RPM is the single most effective thing we can do to reduce noise. And if we're flying a fixed pitch prop, greater altitude and lateral separation is our most effective tactic. With that understanding, let's look at strategies for reducing noise in the airport environment. And let's begin with the takeoff. Some airports seem to attract residential development the way mobile homes attract tornadoes. It's important to select a run-up location as far from houses as possible. For the same reason, if you have a choice, use a runway located as far from noise-sensitive neighborhoods as possible. Even if it weren't a good idea, for safety reasons, avoiding intersection takeoffs helps us reduce our noise signature. Using the full length of a runway allows us to gain the maximum amount of altitude before we cross the airport boundary and fly over nearby homes. Using the best angle of climb speed will net us the greatest altitude gain for the distance traveled. If this makes you uncomfortable, stick with the best rate of climb speed for your climb out. We'll retract our landing gear as soon as we have established a positive rate of climb and can no longer land on the remaining runway. That reduces drag, which again allows us to leave the airport environment with the greatest altitude gain. As we approach the airport boundary, and certainly before we fly over any residential areas, we'll reduce power to the cruise climb power setting. This will slow the prop as much as safely possible. Your pilot's operating handbook or airplane flight manual will provide you with acceptable cruise climb power settings. You may be surprised at how slowly you can safely turn that propeller. Many pilots don't realize that operating over square, that is, at a higher manifold pressure than prop RPM, is perfectly permissible in most airplanes. And remember also to make your power reduction as smoothly as possible to reduce those abrupt attention-getting sounds. Let's apply these suggestions to an average A36 Bonanza and see the difference in noise created at the departure end of the runway. First, a typical high-power, low rate of climb departure. Now let's compare that to a best rate of climb departure with a power reduction to the cruise climb setting. As you can see, this simple change in procedure yielded a 5 dB reduction in noise at the airport boundary. The route we choose for our departure is very important. Our first choice would be any noise abatement procedure established for the runway we're using. Where none are published, I often ask the FBO or airport management about the best departure plan. At controlled airports, ATC instructions override noise abatement procedures. But I've usually found that, traffic and weather permitting, controllers will allow me to use departure routes that help me avoid noise-sensitive neighborhoods. If no noise abatement procedures have been established, we'll rely on common sense to choose a departure path. We'll try to climb out over industrial areas or interstate highways where will be the quietest activity around. Airports hemmed in by development pose a special challenge. Sometimes the best you can do is just head for the least populated areas, at the highest possible altitude, of course. Flight instructors are particularly important in the effort to reduce perceived aircraft noise. Repetitive activities like touch and goes and practice instrument approaches are best performed at rural airports wherever possible. Simulated engine failures should not be done in areas where the roar of the engine coming back to life will be particularly annoying to people on the ground. Ground reference maneuvers such as turns around a point should be practiced in the least densely populated areas available to you. Arriving at our destination, it's again important for us to know and use any established noise abatement procedure. Beyond that, remember the basic guidelines. Stay as high as possible, keep the prop as slow as possible, and fly patterns as close to the runway as possible. Some pilots fly an unnecessarily wide, long pattern. This not only takes them out over residential areas at relatively low altitude, it doesn't leave many options in the event of a power loss. Whenever possible, maintain pattern altitude until turning onto the base leg. This is particularly beneficial from the noise standpoint when you have to extend the downwind leg for any reason. Some pilots also allow themselves to get too low, too far out. Then they have to drag the airplane up to the runway with power. The folks living underneath this experiment in pitch and power probably won't appreciate the demonstration. Remember that flaps are used to slow down and go down. It just doesn't make sense to get any draggier than necessary in the pattern and then have to add power to reach the runway. Clean, stable, low power, low drag approaches are significantly quieter approaches. On final, stay at or above the VASI and don't advance the propeller control until you've made your final power reduction.
No surprise with the warm air traveling quickly up through the Bering Strait that ice is becoming less and less prevalent across the Bering Strait north of St. Lawrence Island, certainly on the west side of Gamble there's no ice anymore. And any ice that's along the coast we have on very good authority from our sea ice experts for the Alaska Sea Ice Program is not fast anymore, certainly not stable. So again, watch that very carefully along the coast anywhere around the Beaufort Sea coast, the Chukchi coast, in Kotzebue Sound, or out across the Bering Sea at this point. Any ice along the coast is no longer stable. Watch for continued and rapid changes there, and you can track those easily by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. While you're there, make sure you check out the new website. If you go to w2.weather.gov/AFC, that's our kind of abbreviation for the Anchorage office, AFC at the end, you'll see the new website and you can try out how things work on that. And whether you like them or don't, send us a note and tell us what works and what doesn't work so we can fix it before it turns into the real website here in just a couple of weeks. As we look at southeast, look for the winds to come out of the south for Lynn Canal at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Winds will remain light and pretty similar to what we see there across the Lynn Canal, heading southward into the Clarence Strait, more of a northwesterly flow there. And you'll see that west onshore flow coming down also from the northwesterly direction as you move south of Cross Sound to the outside of the Dixon entrance there around Craig. 25 knots with a 5-foot sea for Friday. Winds remain pretty light, more of a north and westerly flow for everyone. 10 to 15 on the inside, 15 on the outside, and looking at 4 to about 5-foot seas across the outer coast for Friday. For south central, northwesterly flow will be the predominant direction there for the Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait region and the Barren Islands, up to 20 knots over the Barrens. Light winds across Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea, more of a variable flow as you get outside of south of Montague Island, more of a 15-knot wind outside of Resurrection Bay with a 4-foot sea there, 7-foot seas east of the eastern Barrens. A gentle north breeze coming down the Cook Inlet region on Friday, 15 to 20. 3-foot seas on the inside of Shelikof Strait. Light and variable winds in the north and western Gulf, and we'll keep our northwesterly flow light with small seas inside of Prince William Sound on Friday. Northerlies in Bristol Bay with a 3-foot sea on Thursday. Northwesterlies crossing the Alaska Peninsula south of Castle Cape and Chignik. Easterlies across the Pacific coast for the Alaska Peninsula over King Cove, 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. Look for that to hold about the same for Friday with a stronger southeasterly flow developing from Castle Cape to Chignik. Easterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 20-knot wind with a 4-foot sea on Friday. And for the eastern chain, more of a 25 to 30 knot wind from the south and east, 14-foot seas expected south of Adak and Atka, and a westerly flow across Kiska to Attu, 20 to 30 knots there, with more of a southerly flow developing once you get to Kiska with a 15-foot sea. Look for those winds to shift to more of a southwesterly direction on Friday, with light and variable winds developing for the central and eastern chain. We'll keep northeasterly winds south of Unalaska and Nikolsky at 15 knots with an 8-foot sea there on Friday. Southerlies coming up from Nunivak Island toward St. Lawrence Island, 20 to 25. Southeasterlies over St. Matthew with an 11-foot sea, and southeasterly winds continue at 25 knots with a 10-foot sea for the Pribilofs on Thursday. Look for winds to diminish and turn to more of an easterly flow across the southern Bering for Friday, 15 to 20 there, and north and easterly winds 20 to 25, moving across St. Lawrence Island to St. Matthew and Nunivak Island with 4 to as high as 10-foot seas out in the west. For the north slope, look for easterlies moving across the Beaufort Sea, 10 to 15 knots. Seas should remain small where the water is open again, and that's many more places each day, about 1 to 2 foot seas there. And east and southeasterly winds for the Chukchi, 15 to 20, with 4 foot seas from Wainwright down to Point Lay. For Friday, south and southwesterly winds move up the coast a little bit more, 10 to 15 knots. Look for easterlies to strengthen, 15 to 20. Again, seas should remain small in most areas for Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, we're still watching for flood conditions, the potential there around the Colville River Delta as ice continues to hold an ice jam formation there across the Sag. And we'll watch for that to change in the next couple days. But as we get out toward the west, low pressure is not moving very much across the Bering. In the meantime, that's allowing a lot of warm air to travel northward. A few showers and thunderstorms are possible closer to the Alcan border in the eastern Brooks Range, and showers are diminishing across southern parts of southeast in the next couple days. Looks to be a pretty warm period for south central, southwest, and southeastern Alaska, and we'll probably see continued showers as we move through Thursday and into Friday for most of the central and northern interior as a frontal boundary lingers across northeastern Alaska going into the 3-day holiday weekend with cooler conditions across the west coast. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather, and we'll see you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.